televerse to Africa. Listeners in Africa may tune to 621 kilohertz medium wave or to the following shortwave frequencies: 6045, 71, 9630, 15410, 15480, 15600, 17785, 17870, 21485, or 21650 kilohertz. And this concludes our transmission to South Asia. VOA English language broadcast will resume at 1 hour GMT with the World Pulse Radio News. It's 19 hours when it's noon time. A American Airlines from the base of America in Washington. The hijackers at Tehran Airport appear to have released more of their hostages than a Canadian airliner. If they have threatened to punish, as they put it, the 2 Americans among the hostages remaining on board. The rallying report from the shortly after that statement, a passenger was brought out on a plane carefree from the beacon. The hijackers called for a medical team, saying an American was wounded and took medical supplies that placed the team back down the truck. The hijackers earlier said they would release hostages who have no connection with their objective, which is the release of prisoners held in Creation Village for a series of bombings last year. Representatives of the European Economic Community and developing nations are signing the third low-nation convention in the Federal News Center today. The Trade and Aid Pact governs the community's policy towards former colonies and overseas territories in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. It guarantees these nations about $6.4 billion in financial aid. The French news agency has a spokesman for the developing nations, Robbie Mamayu, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Papua New Guinea, criticized the impact of the ceremony. He said their problems include wild fluctuations in prices of raw materials, and which many developing countries have for export earnings. In Bhopal, India, a controversial theory in the arrest and subsequent release of David Warren Anderson, the U.S. citizen, and board chairman of the Union Carbide Company. From Bhopal, VOA correspondent John Winter reports on some of the events following the disastrous closing of Scott Street. Mr. Anderson was arrested shortly after arrival here in Bhopal. The legal team of technical specialists investigated the release of President to a classified factory. Within a few years, he was released on $2,000 bail until last 30 days. Several Indian officials at the company remain under arrest. Now, a controversy is building up over 2 years of people here are asking how the American multinational executives should be arrested in such a serious case, and we release on such loads for every 6 hours without a community for a decent championship. The case owner is really also because of its against accusations, it turned a blind eye to previous evidence that the ruling Carbide Street, which also said civil casualties on their scale. The state government appears to be looking at efforts to delay Prime Minister Rob Rusandy published a release of the arrest of Mr. Anderson. The evidence of India stated official group are still told. Anderson in the police collected himself to very small and very populated in the land. The state government announced it. Now, the world will news for India. Lebanese Jews and Shiite Muslim militias have given tentative approval to revisions in a plan to deploy the Lebanese army on the coastal road south of Beirut. Military forces say the acceptance by Chief Walid Jindlat and PRG leader Nabi Berri today advances the plan drafted by Lebanese military council. The deployment was held up for a week when these leaders objected to the proposed extensive army penetration and force overlooking the coastal highway. United States Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East Affairs, Richard Murphy, witnessed being tried in reality today. Mr. Murphy is beginning a tour of several Middle East nations discussing the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. He visited Saudi Arabia 5 weeks ago during another tour of the region. Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres says relations between Israel and China will focus on strengthening economic ties. Mr. Peres told Jerusalem Radio in an interview in Paris he has asked French industrialists to follow the lead of U.S. industrialists. He noted Israel has not agreed with the U.S. government to establish working groups, government representatives, and industrialists from both countries. The Polish government has released 2 leading political prisoners from the Warsaw jail and has returned them to their homes in Gdańsk. From Vienna, Julian Murguer has this report. Saturday, released 2 underground activists who had bound the Solidarity trade union because of lack of evidence. The 2 had been charged with blasphemy and treason charges. Irish media announced late Friday offenses committed by activists Bogdan Lis and Petr Niedzecki were not considered treason under Poland's penal code. The chief military prosecutor's office says Mr. Lis and Mr. Niedzecki sabotage Poland's constitutional order by force, an offense covered by an amnesty last July. The amnesty freed over 600 political prisoners but did not cover acts of treason. Authorities released the 2 activists the day their 6-month arrest warrant expired. With the news report, the release of the 2 will fulfill U.S. conditions for Polish membership in the International Monetary Fund. The move will also lead to further lifting of Western economic sanctions imposed after Poland declared martial law 3 years ago. Roland Nagel, VOA News, Vienna. French President François Mitterrand has arrived in Zaire on the first stop of an African tour which is expected to focus on the conflict in Sahel. Libya has failed to honor an agreement with France for a joint withdrawal from Chad. State troops left last month but reports say Libyan forces remain in Chad. During his 2-day visit to Zaire, President Mitterrand will hold talks with another strong supporter of the Chadian government, Zaire President Mobutu Sese Seko. Zaire sent about 2,000 troops to Chad to assist France in supporting Chadian President Hissène Habré against Chadian-backed rebels. The Black South African first leader and winner of this year's Nobel Peace Prize, Bishop Desmond Tutu, is making a stop in Britain on his way to Oslo. He flew to London after meeting with President Reagan at the White House. David Weber reports from London. Reporters at London Airport asked Mr. Tutu what he thought of President Reagan's claim that America's highest diplomacy, as he called it, was responsible for South African officials releasing 11 past later leaders. The president was entitled to personal compensation, Tutu said, but equally, the growing number of anti-apartheid demonstrators throughout the world will show that man as the guilty release of the 11 detainees. The bishop also said there could be an ulterior motive behind the South African move. We could also say that the rebellion government, aware of the ritual that religion wish to divert attention from the religion. He could either use the pressure of the military that the people can believe. Bishop Tutu travels to the ancient cathedral of Canterbury in southeast England, where he delivers the sermon Sunday morning. He then goes to Oslo on Monday to collect his Nobel Prize. David Weber for VOA News, London. Zimbabwe's Prime Minister Robert Mugabe says the 6 sub-Saharan states have rejected South African proposals on independence for Namibia. He is quoted by the semi-official Corona news agency in Harare as saying the decision came at a meeting at yesterday's in Tanzania of which the Ministers of the States aligned against South Africa on the subject of Namibia. There was no formal communique. Mr. Mugabe of the sub-Saharan states rejects South Africa's demand for a linkage between a Cuban surplus withdrawal from Angola and independence for Namibia. The military government of Suriname says it has accepted a proposal for transition to democratic rule. An official statement says the plan calls for a 27-month transition period beginning January 1st. Its government would no longer be appointed by the military, but by a national assembly which would draw up guidelines for a new constitution. The armed forces would hold 14 of 31 assembly seats, with the rest going to labor unions and to business. The Philippine news agency says President Ferdinand Marcos went to unusual lengths during a cabinet meeting today to demonstrate that he has not had recent surgery, as members of the political opposition claim. VOA's Al Griffin reports from Hong Kong. President Marcos raised his fist toward the beginning of the 90-minute cabinet meeting, but first, virtually disappeared from public view on November 14th. The Philippine news agency said he also unbuttoned his shirt collar to say he had no scars on his neck, repeating another recent report. The shirt raising was reportedly recorded on film and video tape by Filipino reporters who regularly cover the presidential palace. No foreign reporters were allowed to attend the meeting. Many members of the Philippine opposition have claimed that President Marcos has had heart or kidney surgery. Official spokesman has said he was suffering only from asthma and influenza. At the cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Sofa Time announced that 90% of the money required to restructure about $5.75 billion of the Philippines' foreign debt will be available by Monday. That would trigger an endorsement from the International Monetary Fund, which is crucial to the plan. Al Griffin, News, Hong Kong. These are the hour's news headlines. It appears hijackers of Tehran airport have released most of their hostages from a Kuwaiti airliner, but they say they will punish the 2 Americans among those remaining on board. Representatives of the European Economic Community and developing nations are signing the third major convention, which contains a $6.4 billion aid package. Several Lebanese factions have tentatively approved changes in terms to deploy the Lebanese army on the coastline of Beirut. That's the news from the Voice of America. I'm Dick Lowell in Washington. Service of the Voice of America, this is Voices of Africa. I'm your host, Jim Malone. In our program tonight, South African Bishop and Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu meets with President Reagan and members of the U.S. Congress on U.S. policy towards South Africa. And South African labor leaders speak on the plight of their fellow union activists in South Africa. President Reagan met Friday with South African Bishop Desmond Tutu at the White House. The two men discussed U.S. policy towards South Africa, a policy Bishop Tutu has criticized as evil, immoral, and unchristian. Following their meeting, Bishop Tutu spoke to reporters outside the White House. We had, as the usual thing, a few meeting in which we agreed that the bank will happen. And the work of the president in my view, is evil and immoral and totally unchristian. We agreed too that it was a system that could, as far as possible, be dismantled by peaceful means. At a news conference following the meeting, President Reagan defended his policy of constructive engagement with South Africa, and American quiet diplomacy has had a positive impact in South Africa. We had a good meeting, and he made some suggestions and proposals. We had an opportunity to explain to him the things that we have been doing in what I like to call quiet diplomacy. I didn't mean a surprise to him. Some of the things that he suggested were things that we are already doing, but there were others that our State Department has spoken to them, and we're going to look at very carefully. I have to disagree with him on the fact that the situation has worsened. It has not. We have made sizable progress there in expressing our repugnance for apartheid and in persuading the South African government to make changes. I think we're going to continue with that kind of thing. President Reagan, speaking at the White House following his meeting Friday with President Tutu. The Nobel Peace Prize winner also called on the U.S. to speak out more strongly against the recent violence in South Africa, saying this should send a message of hope to the oppressed people in this country. The president said that there was no question at all about the repugnance for him and for his administration of the policy of apartheid, but they wanted to see this policy change. They believed that this policy that his government was pursuing had in fact gained certain advantage. Mr. Tutu also supports American business disinvestment in South Africa. But at his news conference, President Reagan reiterated his opposition to American disinvestment. Many people are critical in some of the protests and the demonstrations here have voiced disapproval of American investment in South Africa, of American companies that are in business there. Well, this is based on ignorance when they say this. The simple truth is that most tribal leaders there openly express their support and experience American business investment there because reverse to Africa. Listeners in Africa maintained a 621 kilohertz medium wave, both to the following shortwave frequencies: 6045, 71, 9620, 15410, 154 580, 15600, 17785, 17870, 21485, or 21660 kilohertz. And this includes our transmission to South Asia. We will allow English language broadcast to resume at 1 hour GMT with a roll-up of radio news. It's 19 hours, Greenwich Mean Time, a thousand hours from the Voice of America. Royal in Washington. The hijackers at Port-Alarm Airport appear to have released more of their hostages than a Canadian airliner. But they have threatened to punish, as they put it, the 2 Americans among the hostages remaining on board. The Iranian report said that shortly after that statement, a passenger was brought out in a huge staircase and beaten. The hijackers called for a medical team saying an American was bleeding. They took medical supplies, but first the team got down distress. The hijackers earlier said they would release hostages who have no connection with their objective, which is the release of prisoners held in Kuwait and jails for for a series of bombings last year. Representatives of the European Economic Community and developing nations are signing the third low-no convention in the Federalist capital today. The Trade and Aid Pact governs the community's policy towards former colonies and overseas territories in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. It guarantees these nations about $6.4 billion in financial aid. The French news agency has a spokesman for the developing nations, Robbie Lamallier, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Catherine Regime, criticized the new fact that the coal miners, who said their problems include wild fluctuations in prices of raw materials, on which many developing countries have turned for export earnings. In Bhopal, India, a controversial hearing in the arrest and subsequent release on bail of Warren Anderson, the U.S. citizen, and the board chairman of the Union Carbide Company. From Bhopal, VOA correspondent John Weaver reports on some of the events following the disastrous closing of last week. Mr. Anderson was arrested shortly after arrival here in Bhopal to lead a team of technical specialists investigating the police of deadly electrolyte gas in a pesticide factory. Within a few days, he was released on $2,000 bail until lawful day. 7 Canadian officials of the company remain under arrest. Now a controversy is building up over Chief Minister Anderson's fake tax. People who are asking how the American multinational executive could be arrested on such a serious charge and be released on such low bail within 6 hours without appearing before a group of magistrates. The case owner here is also defended himself against accusations that turned a blind eye to previous articles of the ruling Paradise City, which also said many casualties over a much smaller scale. The state government appears to be making an effort to delete the administrator of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi from the decision leading to the arrest and release of Mr. Anderson. The Republic of India stated official daytime sources are clear. Actions in the police were at the request of what is called the various authorities in the land. The state government denies this. John Weaver, VOA News, Bhopal, India. Lebanon's Jews and Shiite Muslim militias have given tentative approval to revisions of a plan to deploy the Lebanese army on the Carefree Road south of Beirut. Military forces say the acceptance by Chief Walid Jindlat and Shiite group leader Nabi Berri today advances the plan drafted by Lebanon's military council. The deployment was held up for a week when Jews leaders objected to the proposed extensive army penetration in Ford, overlooking the coastal highway. United States Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East Richard Murphy met with King Saud in Riyadh today. Mr. Murphy is beginning a tour of several Middle East nations discussing the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. He visited Saudi Arabia 5 weeks ago for another tour of the region. Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres says relations between Israel and France will focus on strengthening economic ties. Mr. Peres told Jerusalem Radio in an interview in Paris he has asked French industrialists to follow the lead of U.S. industrialists. He noted Israel has reached an agreement with the U.S. government to establish working teams of government representatives and industrialists from both countries. The Polish government has released 2 leading political prisoners from the Warsaw jail and has returned them to their homes in Gdansk. From Vienna, Julian Murguer has this report. Polish authorities Saturday released 2 underground activists who had bound to Solidarity trade union because of lack of evidence. The 2 had been charged with blasphemy and treason charges. Polish media announced late Friday offenses committed by activists Bogdan Lis and Piotr Niezewski were arrested in civil treason under Poland's penal code. The chief military prosecutor's office says Mr. Lis and Mr. Niezewski plotted to overthrow Poland's constitutional order by force, an offense covered by the amnesty last July. The amnesty sued over 600 political prisoners but did not cover acts of treason. Authorities released the two activists the day their 6-month arrest warrant expired. Western news report, the release of the two will fulfill U.S. conditions for Polish membership in the International Monetary Fund. The move will also lead to further lifting of Western economic sanctions imposed after Poland declared martial law 3 years ago. Joel and Makeley, VOA News, Vienna. Vice President Sofa has arrived in Zaire on the first stop of an African tour which is expected to focus on the conflict in Sahel. Libya has failed to honor an agreement with France for a joint withdrawal of Chad. French troops left last month, but reports say Libyan forces remain in Chad. During the 2-day visit to Zaire, President Sofa will hold talks with another strong supporter of the Chadian government, Zaire President Mobutu Sese Seko. Zaire sent about 2,000 troops to Chad to assist France in supporting Chadian President Ibrahim against Chadian-backed rebels. The Black South African Church leader and winner of this year's Nobel Peace Prize, Bishop Desmond Tutu, is making a stop in Britain on his way to Oslo. He flew to London after a meeting with President Reagan at the White House. David Redder reports from London. Reporters at London Airport asked Mr. Tutu what he thought of President Reagan's claim that America's quiet diplomacy, as he called it, was responsible for South African officials who reached 11 deaths later meeting. The president was entitled to personal satisfaction, Mr. Tutu said, but equally, the growing number of anti-apartheid demonstrators throughout the world will show their campaign that secured the release of the 11 detainees. The bishop also said there could be an ulterior motive behind the South African move. We should also see that the fidelity of those moves aware that the nuclear meeting of religion went to divert attention from the religion. I don't mind the personal reveries of the people in the Middle East. Bishop Tutu travels to the ancient cathedral of Canterbury in southeast England, where he delivers the sermon Sunday morning. He then goes to Oslo on Monday to collect his Nobel Prize. David Weber for VOA News, London. Zimbabwe Prime Minister Robert Mugabe says the 6 sub-Saharan states have rejected South African proposals on independence for Namibia. He is quoted by the semi-official news agency in Harare as saying the decision came at a meeting at yesterday in Tanzania, of representatives of the states aligned against South Africa on the subject of Namibia. There is no formal communique. Mr. Mugabe said the frontline states reject South Africa's demand for a linkage between achieving swift withdrawal from Angola and independence for Namibia. The military government of Suriname says it has accepted a proposal for transition to democratic rule. An official statement says the plan calls for a 27-month transition period beginning January 1st. The government would no longer be appointed by the military, but by a national assembly which would draw up guidelines for a new constitution. The armed forces would hold 13 of 31 assembly seats, with the rest going to labor unions and to business. The Philippine news agency says President Ferdinand Marcos went to an unusual length during a cabinet meeting today to demonstrate that he has not had recent surgery, as members of the political opposition say. VOA's Al Pessin reports from Hong Kong. President Marcos raised his case toward the beginning of the 90-minute cabinet meeting, the first since he virtually disappeared from public view on November 14th. The 13-year agency said he also unbuttoned his neck collar to show he had no scars on his neck, refuting another recent report. The court measure was reportedly reported on film and video tape by Filipino reporters who regularly covered a presidential palace. No foreign reporters were allowed to attend the meeting. Many members of the Philippine opposition have claimed that President Marcos has had heart or kidney surgery. Official spokesman has said he was suffering only from asthma and influenza. At the cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Sofa announced that 90% of the money required to restructure about $5.75 billion of the Philippines' foreign debt will be available by Monday. That would trigger an endorsement from the International Monetary Fund, which is crucial to the plan. Now, pressing VOA News, Hong Kong. These are the hour's news headlines. It appears hijackers of Civil-Air Air Force have released most of their hostages from a Kuwaiti airliner. But they say they were punished to 2 Americans among those remaining on board. Representatives of the European Economic Community and developing nations are signing the third major convention, which contains a $6.5 billion aid package. Several Lebanese factions have tentatively approved changes in plans to destroy the Lebanese army on the coastline of Beirut. That's the news from the Voice of America. I'm Dick Royal in Washington. African Bishop and Nobel Peace Prize winner President Reagan and members of the U.S. Congress on the U.S. policy towards South Africa. And South African labor leaders speak on the part of their fellow union activists in South Africa. President Reagan met Friday with South African Bishop Desmond Tutu at the White House. The two men discussed U.S. policy towards South Africa, a policy Bishop Tutu has criticized as evil, immoral, and unchristian. Following their meeting, Bishop Tutu spoke to reporters outside the White House. We had, as a usual thing, a series of meetings in which we agreed that the background from the work of the president is the president, in my view, is evil and immoral and totally unchristian. We agreed too that it was a system that should, if possible, be dismantled by peaceful means. At a news conference following the meeting, President Reagan defended his policy of constructive engagement with South Africa, and American-style diplomacy has had a positive impact in South Africa. We had a good meeting, and he made some suggestions and proposals. We had an opportunity to expand the room for things that we have been doing in what I like to call quiet diplomacy. I think we were surprised to him. Some of the things that he suggested are things that we were already doing, but there were others that our State Department has taken heed of, and we're going to look at very carefully. I have to disagree with him on the fact that the situation just is working. It is not. We have made sizable progress there in expressing our repugnance for apartheid and in persuading the South African government to make and we're going to continue with that policy. President Reagan, speaking at the White House following his meeting Friday with President Tutu. The Nobel Peace Prize winner also called on the U.S. to speak out more strongly against the recent violence in South Africa, saying this would send a message of hope to the oppressed people in this country. The President said that there was no question at all about the repugnance for him in terms of administration of the policy of apartheid, but they wanted to see this policy change. They believe that this policy that his government was pursuing had in fact gained certain advantage. This is people also support American business disinvestment in South Africa. But at his news conference, President Reagan reiterated his opposition to American disinvestment. Many people are critical and some of the protests the demonstrations here that there's disapproval of American investment in South Africa, of American companies that are in business there. Well, this is based on ignorance, so the people prove it. But most black tribal leaders have openly expressed their support in American business investment there because
supporters have marched peacefully through Beijing, calling for democratic reform and more freedom. As VOA's outpatient reports from Beijing, students also marched in at least 4 other Chinese cities.
the students marched through police lines and onto Tiananmen Square in 2 groups in the early afternoon, carrying banners calling for democracy, human rights, and clean government. As the students marched, officials from the Asian Development Bank passed them in limousines going the other way after the opening session of the bank's annual meeting being held at the Great Hall of the People on the square's west side. The students stayed on the square through the afternoon, singing and listening to speeches, and then marched wearily back to their campuses some 15 kilometers away. Their march had been joined by students from half a dozen other cities and by several hundred young Chinese journalists calling for freedom of the press. Witnesses reached by telephone by foreign news agencies say several thousand students also marched on Thursday in Shanghai, in the western city of Xi'an, and in the southern cities of Wuhan and Changsha. Shortly before the Beijing demonstration broke up, student leaders announced the 2-week-old class boycott at most Beijing universities will end on Friday, but they say their democracy movement will go on. Al Passenger News, Beijing.
The main leader of the pro-independence movement in the French Pacific territory of New Caledonia has been shot and killed. Melanesian separatism leader Jean-Marie Sabal and close aides were gunned down Thursday by a lone assailant on the island of Ovid. Mr. Sabal's bodyguards and hands killed the attacker. Political leaders in France have condemned the killing and warned of a resurgence of separatist violence in the territory. The U.S. space shuttle Atlantis stands ready to launch with the astronauts aboard, a 4 loads of fuel in the tank, and hopes the weather will cooperate. The launch is scheduled for 17 hours 48 GMT today, but forecasters say there is a 30% chance the mission will be delayed by unfavorable weather conditions. Breezes are expected to push rain showers offshore, but the strong winds could delay the launch if there are too drifts. Live VOA coverage of the launch of Atlantis begins at 17 hours 30 GMT. President Bush has come under pressure in Washington to agree to early east-west talks on short-range nuclear missiles. The question of the negotiations, pushed by West Germany but rejected by President Bush, has sharply divided NATO. The former chief arms control advisor to the Reagan administration, Paul Nitze, also urged talks on the missiles, telling the Washington Post the United States is in danger of being isolated within NATO. President Bush says it would be a mistake to start negotiations on the missiles, which he says are essential to NATO's deterrent strategy. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher backed the president's position. A Canadian spokesman said Canada is committed to modernizing NATO's short-range nuclear forces and encouraging East-West negotiations to reduce such weapons. And Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney is meeting today with Mr. Bush in Washington. But as VOA White House correspondent Alex Benita reports, Mr. Mulroney said his talks will focus on solidarity among NATO allies.
The dispute is over whether NATO should agree to early East-West negotiations aimed at reducing short-range nuclear forces. West Germany favors the idea, the United States opposes it, and wants NATO to approve a modernization of the alliance's aging short-range nuclear missiles. Other allies are divided. Canada is said to have a compromise proposal involving both negotiation and modernization. But at the start of his talks with Mr. Bush, Canadian Prime Minister Mulroney said he hadn't come to Washington to broker a settlement.
I'm not here to broker anything. I'm principle of NATO solidarity. We're all standing together. I put questions to the press or the press out question like this. I can't put it any better.
The talks come just 4 weeks before a NATO summit meeting in Brussels. Unless an agreement is worked out beforehand, the short-range dispute is expected to dominate the discussion. Alex Benita, VOA News, the White House.
Polish leader Wojciech Jaruzelski has proposed formal pardons for all those accused of political offenses since the creation of the Independent Solidarity Trade Union in 1980. Speaking in Warsaw, the Polish leader noted the recent start of dialogue with the opposition. He also stressed the Communist Party's seriousness in seeking national agreement as it prepares for next month's National Assembly elections. Western correspondents in Warsaw say the proposal would, in effect, rehabilitate hundreds of solidarity activists. The Soviet government has drafted a new law which gives labor unions greater independence and the right to strike in some circumstances. A top Soviet labor official noted the right to strike is being considered as a means to press management to speed up the resolution of labor disputes. One report quotes an unnamed Soviet lawyer as saying the draft law excludes politically motivated strikes. The new legislation is expected to be adopted in the next few months. Pakistan says 2 people have been killed and 12 wounded in an air raid by Afghan government planes in Pakistani territory. Authorities say the jets bombed an Afghan refugee camp in northwest frontier province. Afghanistan warned last month of attacks on Pakistani territory if the Islamabad government continued what it called interference in Afghanistan. You're listening to the Voice of America. A U.S. Marine helicopter on a nighttime training exercise has crashed in southern France, killing all 5 Marines on board. The helicopter went down in a ball of flame after it struck a power line near the village of Wuhan late Wednesday. The U.S. Defense Department says the helicopter was the lead aircraft in a flight of 2 taking part in a routine exercise at the French Army base near Bretagne, near the Mediterranean port of Toulon. The Sri Lankan government and leaders of the Tamil rebellion are meeting in Colombo for their first peace talks in 4 years. The discussions at a hotel in Colombo opened Thursday amid tight security. The main rebel group, the Liberation Tigers, says it will observe a ceasefire during the talks. Observers in Colombo say a formal truce will be one of the first issues discussed. French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas has announced plans to visit Israel for Middle East peace talks, as PLO leader Yasser Arafat ended a visit to Paris. In a radio interview, Mr. DeMar said he will make the trip to Israel soon. Israel strongly objected to the Arafat visit. Commenting on the PLO leader's visit, the foreign minister said Mr. Arafat had dealt a fatal blow to the PLO charter, which calls for Israel's destruction. Earlier this week, Mr. Arafat said the 1954 charter is no longer valid. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has called for cooperation from opposition parties to pass an anti-violence law. VOA correspondent Phil Parada in Seoul reports the opposition parties have expressed reservations about supporting the proposed law.
President Snow says an anti-violence law that outlaws the use of firebombs in protest demonstrations could be passed at the next session of the National Assembly. Gasoline-filled bottles that burst into flames when they drink are the main weapon of student demonstrators. Student demonstrators used firebombs to set fire to a library in a university protest Wednesday. The fire killed 6 riot policemen. It is the worst case of radical violence in recent years. The opposition parties have joined the government in denouncing radical violence, but they say the government should implement internal reforms in return for opposition support for anti-violence legislation. President Snow says he will impose emergency measures, if necessary, to quell radical violence. Phil Parada, VOA News, Seoul.
U.S. Vice President Dan Quayle has ended his 12-day Asian tour with a visit to a Cambodian refugee camp in Thailand. Mr. Quayle and his wife spoke to many of the people who have fled the Vietnamese occupation of Cambodia. The Vice President said his visit will help call attention to the plight of Cambodian refugees. At a news conference, Mr. Quayle again said the U.S. government may supply weapons to non-communist resistance groups in Cambodia. The United States and Japan have reached tentative agreement on ways to curb the use of drift nets by fishing trawlers in the North Pacific. U.S. fishermen say the huge nets, used by trawlers from Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, are diminishing stocks of some types of fish and threatening others with extinction. These are the hour's news headlines. More than 100,000 Chinese students and supporters marched peacefully through Beijing calling for democratic freedom. South Korean riot police blocked a planned labor rally as officials considered tough new laws to combat violent protests. The U.S. Space Shuttle Atlantis stands ready for launch, sending favorable weather conditions. President Bush comes under pressure in Washington to agree to early East-West talks on short-range nuclear missiles. I'm Imani Crosby in Washington.
On the local environmental issues around the world, there's been tremendous progress. But on the global scale issues, what we've seen since the period of this day has been almost continuous decline.
Those stories plus some of Earth's great treasures on our website of the week. I'm Art Stein. Welcome to VOA Science and Technology magazine, Our World. Next Saturday, officials from around the world meet in Tokyo for the second Earth Observation Summit. The goal is to share information from sources such as satellite sensors and ground-based weather stations about the state of planet Earth. The head of the U.S. delegation, Conrad Lautenbacher, told reporters it's like getting a parent-wide medical checkup.
Like going to the doctor and getting a complete diagnosis of what's going on, trying to understand how all the systems in the Earth work together.
Information from these Earth observations helps predict the weather, chart global climate change, and can inform the decisions of policymakers. UNICEF and the World Health Organization have launched a global strategy to encourage breastfeeding. As we hear from Steve Baragona, figures from UNICEF indicate that in the first 6 months of life, only 39% of mothers exclusively breastfeed their children.
The new action plan aims to double that figure over the next decade. Experts say breastfeeding makes for healthier babies. Mother's milk provides the best nutrition and protects babies from disease. But UNICEF's Miriam Labak notes that the aggressive international marketing of infant formula has contributed to the decline of breastfeeding. So, too, has the fact that women entering the workforce need a convenient alternative way to feed their babies. Other women have been the victims of bad medical advice. Dr. Labak says the new global strategy will refocus attention on what's best for children.
So what we're doing now is not something new, really. We're reestablishing the biological norm that the baby was. Unfortunately, it's still for lost, but we still have to be in place.
The UNICEF and WHO strategy also deals with the risks and benefits of breastfeeding for women who are HIV positive. The virus can spread from mothers to children through breast milk. Dr. Labak says the risk is highest when mothers switch between breast milk and formula. She adds the benefits of exclusive breastfeeding can still outweigh the risks. But she says mothers should seek a doctor's advice. I'm Steve Baragona.
Plant scientists from China and Sierra Leone are this year's winners of the $250,000 World Food Prize for their work aimed at improving the quality and quantity of rice production. We caught up with the African winner, Dr. Monty Jones, on the road in Harare, Zimbabwe. Over a less than perfect phone line, he explained that farmers who use his hybrid of African and Asian rice breed, known as Norika, New Rice for Africa, can dramatically increase production from the typical yield of 1 ton per hectare.
Now, we see Norika is more than double the yield. So typically, I'm saying that the yield of Norika will range from something like 2 to 2.5 tons per hectare on that traditional cultivation system to excess of 5 tons per hectare in the food management system.
In addition, Norika resists insects and grows faster, often allowing farmers to plant a second crop during a growing season. Increasing production won't help farmers increase their income unless consumers want to buy the product, and consumers like the familiar taste of their traditional rice. But Monty Jones says Norika retains that quality of its African ancestors.
The reason why most of the farmers will retain the African indigenous rice species is because of the aroma, and this is transferred into Norika. So it's a very good aroma, the kind of taste that the majority of the consumers will prefer.
In addition to yielding more rice per hectare, Norika is also a more nutritious seed with more protein than traditional rice. And Dr. Jones says that because this new African rice hybrid can dramatically expand production, the increased supply should help prevent increases in the prices consumers pay. Despite its advantages, Norika is not expected to displace traditional rice varieties entirely. Rather, it's intended to add to the several traditional varieties that peasant farmers already grow as a hedge against the dangers of concentrating on only one kind of rice.
And the approach that we have taken to the determination of Norika is one where we will add to the farmer's food portfolio. We do not want the traditional varieties to disappear. Most of the seasoned farmers, for security purposes, will use 2 or 3 varieties.
The $250,000 World Food Prize will be presented to Monty Jones and his Chinese co-winner, Yuan Long King, known as the father of hybrid rice, in October.
time again for the website of the week. With Earth Day coming up on Thursday, we thought it would be appropriate to check out a site that highlights some of the world's natural wonders. So, our website of the week is the UNESCO World Heritage Center at whc.unesco.org. In 1972, a United Nations conference recognized the need to protect the world's cultural and natural heritage. Over 3 decades, more than 750 sites have been added to the list, including natural wonders such as the Grand Canyon, the Great Barrier Reef, and Lake Malawi National Park, and great achievements of human construction like the city of Cusco in Peru, Petra in Jordan, and Vatican City.
Countries around the world can nominate natural or cultural sites on their property to be included on this list, which means that site will be protected for future generations.
In fact, says Carolyn Sheck, an editor on the World Heritage website, feedback from users actually provides information to help protect the site.
We get a lot of information about what's happening at the different sites. Often we get emails from people who have visited sites that alert us about problems, maybe an illegal highway project or something happening that could be threatening the site.
Countries with the most sites on the list are in Europe, and so the keepers of the World Heritage list now give preference to underrepresented areas. But with heritage sites in more than 100 countries, chances are you'll find the location of outstanding universal values nearby. There's also a special kids section on the website designed to interest children as well as both parents and teachers. A new version of the World Heritage Center is set to launch on May 6th. UNESCO promises it will be more interactive, but it will still be in both English and French, and the URL or web address will remain whc.unesco.org. There's also a link to it at our site, which is voanews.com/ourworld. Like to suggest a website of the week? Send us a letter or email looking for our address at the end of the show. On Tuesday, Microsoft released several security patches for its Windows operating system, including 3 labeled critical. An estimated 90% of the world's personal computers run on Windows software. Critics have said Microsoft has failed to make its products as safe as it should be. But in a recent online message from Bill Gates, the company's founder and chairman describes numerous steps it is taking to improve computer security. And there's another computer upgrade story this week. You or I might load new software from a floppy disk or a CD-ROM or download it from the internet. But engineers at the U.S. space agency NASA radioed new software across 300 million kilometers to its 2 Mars rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. The upgrade should allow the 6-wheeled vehicles to travel farther and be more productive as they roam over the Martian surface in a mission that was recently extended through September. On Sunday, a Russian Soyuz spacecraft is scheduled to lift off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan to carry a new crew to the International Space Station. American astronaut Mike Spink and veteran Russian cosmonaut Gennady Fedalka will stay on board the space station for about 6 months, which is typical. The Russians are proposing that the rotation be extended to a full year. That would provide more data about how humans adapt to long-duration spaceflight. Also, it would allow the financially strapped Russian space program to accept more lucrative commercial business, including foreign astronauts and space tourists. Incidentally, Monday, April 12th, marks the 43rd anniversary of Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin's historic orbital flight in 1961. Major Gagarin, who died in a plane crash in 1968, was the first human in space. Today, it's hardly worth mentioning though. Russians and Americans fly together aboard the space station, but at the height of the Cold War, Gagarin's flight stunned many in the West who feared they were losing the space race.